A villain. Every good story needs a villain. You honestly think that you're the hero in all of this? Well, of course I am. Who else could I possibly be?
Now, as much fun as that intro was, not every story actually needs a villain, but there's a reason the vast majority of them have them. There are few better ways to create and escalate drama than to embody opposition to the hero as a person. But villains come in all kinds of flavors: maniacs, masterminds, personal nemesis, and it feels like it's increasingly popular to try and bring some shades of gray to your villain so things aren't quite so black and white. It's generally perceived as being a bit more real, more mature, since in real life it's pretty rare that a true clear-cut villain is going to turn up and make our moral choices simple by their existence. Except that I've noticed that these supposedly layered villains still have a tendency to do something that makes it absolutely clear that they are definitely the bad guys, that the audience won't question them being stopped with violence. So I'm going to be talking about a very specific stripe of villain being used in a fairly specific way, because even your flat out wants to cover the world in darkness villain can be humanized by how they interact with others and finding out about their history, things like that. No, what I want to talk about is villains who have moral complexity at the start, and oftentimes even for the bulk of the story, but who then lose it. Maybe the cause they're fighting for is one the audiences might sympathize with. Maybe the amount of harm or damage they're causing doesn't warrant clear violent intervention, but then something happens, or more likely the villain in question does something that undermines, contradicts, or otherwise removes the complexity from the situation. What I'm not talking about is something like Thanos, where okay, there is a point to be made about overpopulation, but we can all agree that anybody whose solution is to kill half the living things in the universe definitely needs to be stopped. And Thanos has already come to that conclusion before the audience even meets him for the first time. A better example from a more recent Marvel property would be Falcon and the Winter Soldier. There are a few characters in that show who could be considered antagonistic, but functionally the primary villains for the show are the group, the Flag Smashers, and in particular their leader, Karli. Now, the Flag Smashers are fighting for the people who are being forgotten, cast aside, or disregarded as the world tries to get back to normal after the blip, when the previously dusted populace all returned, because those in charge are ignoring all of the problems that previously existed with that old normal. And they're going to end up rolling back progress in numerous areas.
Do we really need to bother with a vote?
It's a pretty understandable cause, and I go into this in my full review, but the story still needs these to be our bad guys. Or actually, it would be more accurate to say the story needs Sam and Bucky to definitely be the good guys. And if these are the people they're fighting, then there needs to be a clear right and wrong moral divide, because otherwise people might start wondering if our heroes are actually helping or not. And to that end, Karli blows up a building with people inside. It kind of comes out of nowhere. It's a surprise even to the people fighting for her cause with her. But it marks Karli out as someone willing to kill innocent people.
Worst case scenario, we kill the hostages.
And clearly our heroes are now right to stop her. Now, that's the example that kind of got my wheels spinning on all of this, but there's plenty of others out there. Another prime example is Bane, as depicted in The Dark Knight Rises. This version of Bane comes into Gotham and targets the Nolanverse equivalent of Wall Street. It sets about tearing apart the lies that have been used to force tighter laws in the time since the previous film. Now, at the start, Bane has a nice moral ambiguity, and ended up being more topical than was even originally intended. As the film shoot was wrapping up, the Occupy Wall Street protest movement started, attempting to highlight the increasing wealth gap between the top 1% and the rest of the United States. But Bane is also vicious and violent right from the opening, so there's an interesting and complex villain here. Or rather, there would be if, one, he wasn't also threatening to blow up the entire city with a bomb because, bad guy? And 2, he didn't turn out to be the pawn of someone out for personal revenge, and all of the eat the rich posturing was just a front the entire time and never the core philosophy of either Bane or Talia al Ghul. Spoilers, I guess. Don't holler at me about that. The movie's almost a decade old, and the twist is stupid anyways. This could have been a deep, morally complex movie, especially since Bruce Wayne himself is part of that top 1%. There could be some deep questions asked of the story, the hero, and of the audience by making him examine at what cost does his wealth even come from in the first place. But no. The guy with the dumb voice and the big bomb, and he's lying about his motives, so it's totally justified for Batman to punch him in the head. Speaking of Batman, there's the ongoing depiction of Poison Ivy. This villainess has long had an environmental angle to her activities, targeting polluters and the like, but her comfort with deadly tactics and her willingness to align herself with less ambiguously evil people from time to time kept her on the side of villain, for a while anyways. In the last decade or two, the character has been gradually shifting into the realm of anti-hero or reformed villain, and I suspect at least part of that has to do with the realization that the only bad thing about her was her tactics, but her concerns about the environment were actually pretty warranted, and having the most prominent environmental activist character in the DC universe be a villain might not be the best look. But getting back to Marvel, Magneto is also an interesting case. Introduced as a flat-out villain, but given shades over time. In most depictions, the dividing line is where his desire to fight for the rights of oppressed mutants of the world crosses over into proper villainy by having him believe that mutants are actually superior to humans and should rule over them. This has been handled in various ways by various authors, but let's take the first X-Men film from 2000 as a test case. Here, Magneto's plan is to actually force genetic mutation in a group of world leaders, turning them into mutants and making it impossible for them to clamp down on mutant kind, if only out of self-interest. It's an interesting plan, and as presented, one without much of a true body count either. So what the movie does to make sure that the audience still knows Magneto has to be stopped is they have the artificial mutation be ultimately fatal, and to have Magneto move ahead with his plans even after he gets informed of this fact.
You're so full of shit. If you were really so righteous, it'd be you in that thing.
Think about how much more complex the climax would have felt if his machine actually worked as intended. If a ton of people weren't going to die, but instead become mutants, would you still have cheered the X-Men to stop him? Of course, by the second film, they just flat out have him trying to kill every single human being on the planet, so we don't even really need to worry about thinking in those kinds of terms from there on out. Now, I hear some of you out there shouting, "What about Killmonger?" So yes, let's talk about Eric from Black Panther. He is an interesting case, and I would argue the strongest case for being able to validate a cause while condemning the person fighting for it, because Falcon and the Winter Soldier did try for this and kind of pulled it off. Sam took up Carly's cause by the end of her mission, and so her goals were validated, but the show still forced things with that building explosion, and it was a really clunky narrative contrivance. Eric's a bit different. What's interesting here is we know his methods well before we actually know his cause. And by introducing his escalating violence first and his desire to use Wakanda's resources to fight for oppressed blacks everywhere second, it's not undercutting the value of the cause.
We're going to send vibranium weapons out to our war dogs. They'll arm oppressed people all over the world so they can finally rise up and kill those in power.
Because doing it the other way around has audiences doubting the value of the mission by the end, because they would have been asking, is that what it takes to fight for this? But by bringing in the goal later, it gives us context to the actions we've already been seeing. And then we see T'Challa, our hero, actually engage and grapple with the questions that are begged by the presence of somebody like Eric. But Eric was also never really a stand-in for that cause, the way Carly and the Flag Smashers were. He was a nasty piece of work, first and foremost, which allows for questions about his purpose to be tackled almost separately from any question about whether or not he should be stopped. The tactics and the mission weren't so intermingled that it became weird that T'Challa ultimately did a less violent version of what Eric wanted by the end. It made perfect sense. And that's pretty impressive. Oh, by the way, don't think that these sorts of things are limited to comic books and superheroes. In fact, it's not even a new issue. Going back to the 1990s, there's the Michael Bay classic, The Rock. I'm sure some are going, wait, there was a moral complexity in a Michael Bay movie? Yeah, actually there was. Well, for a little bit anyway. So you see, the main villain in this film is General Hummel, played by Ed Harris. He steals a bunch of, frankly, gruesome chemical weapons and threatens to fire them at San Francisco if he doesn't get $100 million. Yeah, it seems pretty clear-cut, bad guy. But here's the thing. He's demanding it from a military slush fund. That's a pile of cash the military has that isn't really accounted for on the books. And the reason he wants it is because over the years, he's lost numerous men in clandestine and black ops missions. And because of the secretive nature of that work, the families of those men were never compensated. Their actions were never acknowledged. And on top of that, we found out later, he's bluffing.
This mission was based on the threat of force. I'm not about to kill 80,000 innocent people. Do you think I'm out of my f***ing mind?
He did really steal the chemical weapons, but he never intended to fire them if push came to shove. So how the heck do you ensure that the audience isn't on this guy's side for the climax? Oh, easy. You have the men underneath him mutiny and kill Hummel once they realize that they won't be getting paid, and have them then fire the weapons anyways. It makes no real sense because firing the rockets won't change the fact that they aren't getting paid, but who cares? Now we can kill the remaining baddies without an ounce of doubt that they deserve it. Whew! Close call. Sometimes films are even trying to be morally ambiguous and still end up copping out on it by the end. One of the first times I personally noticed this whole removal of moral grayness was in 2001 with the movie Training Day. Now, in this movie, Denzel Washington gives an Oscar-winning performance as Alonzo Harris, a veteran narcotics detective taking rookie officer Jake Hoyt, played by Ethan Hawke, out on the job to see if Jake can hold up on the streets that Alonzo has worked for years. The ethics of this movie are deliciously gray. There is no question that Alonzo is not a good person. He has little use for the rules.
I want justice, right?
Is that not justice?
That's street justice.
What's wrong with street justice?
Oh, just let the animals wipe themselves out,
God
right?
willing.
And the film openly asks the question, what if we need somebody like this to take on the worst elements?
To protect the sheep, you got to catch the wolf. And it takes a wolf to catch a wolf. You understand?
Yeah. He's a bad guy, but this is a bad world, and maybe it would be even worse without him operating the way that he is. It's a question that Jake himself struggles with. Right up until the point where we find out Alonzo has arranged for Jake to be killed, and then later we see the neighborhood turn on Alonzo. So yeah, no, he was definitely totally the bad guy, and Jake's a hero for taking him down, no question. That infuriated me, even at the age of 19, because it would have been so much more interesting to see Jake make the choice to take down Alonzo, but not have it be made clear whether that was ultimately going to help or hurt this community. Now, I don't just want to say, imagine if the moral ambiguity wasn't lost and have this all be thought exercises. Let's take a look at my own personal prime example of a film that never copped out on a moral ambiguity of its situation right up until the end. Let's talk about Gone Baby Gone, a 2007 film starring Casey Affleck, which was the directorial debut of Ben Affleck. Now, quick note, both Casey and Ben have misconduct allegations against them in the last few years, and while I'm not going to be digging into that right now, I do want to at least acknowledge it, and I don't want anyone to take my praising of the film as defense of anybody's actions, okay? Okay, also, spoilers, like for the end. So the film follows a private investigator named Patrick as he looks into the disappearance of a 4-year-old daughter of a single mother. Things go messy, and the young girl is believed drowned. By the end, it's learned that she is in fact alive and in the care of a police captain and his wife, who staged the kidnapping to get the girl away from her neglectful mother. This leaves Patrick with one of two choices. Leave a young girl in the care of a loving couple of means and let her actual mother believe her to be dead, or report the whole thing, bring kidnappers to justice, and return a 4-year-old to a broken home where she's barely cared for.
When the lights go out and you ask yourself, is she better off here or better off there? You know the answer.
What's never gonna happen, what I'm not gonna do, is have to apologize to a grown woman who comes to me and says I was kidnapped when I was a little girl, and my aunt hired you to find me. And you did. You found me with some strange family. But you broke your promise and you left me there.
Patrick chooses the latter, in direct opposition of what his girlfriend thinks he should do, so he loses that relationship. The captain is arrested, and the girl is returned to her mother. When I was watching this, I kept waiting for the situation to become less morally messy. I was expecting one of a few things. Maybe it would turn out the captain was actually a child molester or was planning to later traffic the girl, or he never was going to just raise her safely, or maybe once we get her back into the custody of her mother, we get a reassuring scene of the mother being more attentive and making it seem like nearly losing her daughter had shown her she needs to do better, and the audience could at least hope for improvement on the home front. Neither of these things, nor any kind of equivalent, ends up happening. The girl is returned. Patrick goes to visit the mother, who is on her way out for a date, even though no babysitter has turned up yet. Patrick offers to stay with the child, and we find out that the mother still doesn't even know the name of her kid's favorite doll. The moral mess of kidnapping is wrong, but it would have been an improved life is left exactly as is. There is no moment of moral clarity where it becomes crystal clear what the right choice was, not for the characters and not for the audience. And it has stuck with me ever since. And I'll be blunt, it's not pleasant. It's a haunting experience. It's not uplifting. It's not triumphant. And it sure as hell isn't cathartic. Which is, of course, why it happens so rarely. Don't misunderstand me on this. There's nothing wrong with rooting for definitely good guys to beat up definitely bad guys. But I can't help but get a bit antsy when films and stories and shows introduce some degree of moral complexity, but then never properly grapple with it. Aside from a general sense of lost potential, there are other issues to consider as well. The entertainment we take in affects us. Not in a clumsy one-to-one, I saw that in a movie, so now I believe it kind of way, but rather in a marinating in the culture kind of way. And if nearly every time a villain has more complex moral questions behind him, the film ultimately removes that complexity by the end, then the films are telling audiences things may seem complicated, but don't worry. It's actually quite simple. You can trust that the designated bad guys are definitely bad. And if villains have motives that appear to be applicable to real-world causes, and by the end it's revealed that they are definitely going too far, or that the cause is just a front for something nefarious, it's telling the audience to question what might appear to be reasonable motives. Now, I need to stress, this is almost never deliberate. It's a natural consequence of creators wanting to have their story not be 100% black and white, but also not wanting to give up the catharsis of the heroes beating villains. But the thing to remember is that when we lack real-life experience, we're going to draw on the nearest equivalent, the media we consume. Now, admittedly, the news probably has a more direct impact, but I'd be a little out of my depth trying to parse that. And even acknowledging that, entertainment has an effect too. If you've never known someone who took up a cause like Occupy Wall Street, then in trying to wrap your head around it, you may end up mentally referring back to that big guy with the bomb who talked about helping the poor, but needed to be stopped by Batman, even if only subconsciously. The stories we tell matter. And the recurring patterns in the stories we tell the most matter all the more. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to support what I do, I have a Patreon. There are rewards for every tier of support. Everything from getting to see videos early to your name in the credits and all sorts of other things. But even if you're not able to do that, there are YouTube memberships. And even if you don't want to do that, like, share, subscribe. They all help me out. I hope you'll leave something down in the comments and we'll talk about it. But you don't have to do any of it. Because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.